The season opener brought its twists and turns, and it started off with an unfortunate start with the injury of Ben Sumarin. He tore his patellar tendon on the game's opening kickoff, and this is already coming off the heels of him tearing his ACL that prematurely ended his season last year. And I feel gutted for Ben Sumarin, to be honest, because he went from a depth linebacker to being used as a fullback, as the Eagles were kind of experimenting with that last year, and for him now to be out for the entire season is just truly gut-wrenching. So obviously, I wish Ben a speedy recovery, and I hope he comes back stronger than ever. Now, the other part of this was that Jalen Carter was ejected for spitting on Dak Prescott prior to the game's first snap. Now, to break this all down, it appears that Dak Prescott and Jalen Carter got into it a little bit, where each was talking trash. Dak was kind of standing behind his two rather large offensive linemen, talking some trash, spat in the direction of the Eagles' defensive huddle, where Jalen saw, and proceeded to then engage in Dak, where later he would spit on Dak's chest. The ref saw that and immediately ejected Jalen Carter before he even placed a single snap in 2025. Credit to the refs, they de-escalated that situation. I think the ejection was warranted, and Jalen just has to be better. He knows that he is the Eagles' defensive anchor, and Vic Fangio makes his entire defensive game plan around him and his availability. The amount of preparation the Cowboys probably put into in terms of blocking schemes and trying to minimize as much damage that Jalen Carter could possibly do was out the window, and this gave the Cowboys new life. I really anticipated that with Jalen Carter there, it would have been a pretty nasty day, as the Cowboys' offensive line isn't quite the same as what it used to be in past seasons, and they do have some younger players on that offensive line. Now, post-game, Jalen Carter did take accountability, which I do appreciate. At this point in time, he has developed quite a bit of a reputation. He's had off-the-field issues heading into the NFL draft. It sort of tanked his draft stock, and now with this, and I'm sure with no tolerance, with taunting being really emphasized this year, and with a lot of the celebrations being cut down with an emphasis on sportsmanship, I wouldn't be surprised that a suspension would loom likely. With Jalen Carter back in the Eagles locker room, Dallas drove right down the field with little to no resistance, as the Eagles defense was struggling to get any type of heat on Dak Prescott. The Dallas offense was very successful in the first half, as they scored on every drive, scoring touchdowns on their first two possessions and followed that up with 2 field goals to close the half. My concerns over the second cornerback spot became a reality as Adoree Jackson was getting torched. He allowed 5 catches for over 100 yards, and then also included a defensive pass interference penalty. And most of this damage came against CeeDee Lamb or George Pickens, but one thing to note was that on each of the Cowboys scoring drives, it was aided by penalty. Some of them were poorly timed, undisciplined defensive fouls, like a defensive PI on Adoree Jackson in the end zone that led to a Javonte Williams touchdown. That's fair. But a lot of these other calls were ticky-tack, and it also seemed that for whatever reason there was a really tight leash on what was deemed taunting or unsportsmanlike conduct, as the Eagles racked up 9 penalties for over 100 yards. Now, despite the Eagles giving up scoring drives, the offense was able to answer the call. Jalen Hurts and Saquon Barkley each provided a spark with the running game, with Jalen capping off the first 2 touchdown drives himself using his legs. And he did a really good job of buying time in the pocket until he found a crease to get into the end zone. And after the defense finally got a stop and held the Cowboys to 3 points, the Eagles executed a 2-minute offense to perfection, where they ended up taking their first lead of the game with a powerful Saquon Barkley run from 10 yards out, as they took a 21-20 lead heading into halftime. After a fast-paced first half between these two NFC East rivals, where they combined to score 40 points, I figured that the over of 47.5 was a slam dunk as long as a team scored a touchdown. But that touchdown didn't happen in the second half. After the Eagles kicked a 58-yard field goal on their opening drive of the second half, scoring points and moving the football became extremely difficult. The defenses tightened up their defensive intensity. Dallas tried to counter after a long Miles Sanders run to get them into the red zone, but 3 plays later and after a controversial defensive penalty on the Eagles, Sanders would go on to fumble, denying the Cowboys any chance of points. After play was suspended for over an hour due to lightning in the South Philly area, the defense would continue to dominate once play resumed. The Eagles had a couple of long drives that at least chewed up some time off the clock, and Dallas had one last chance to take the lead. CD, who did have a really good night, finishing with 7 catches for 110 yards. He did have a few drops, and the final one was devastating as Dak did buy some time against the Eagles pass rush as he lofted a deep ball towards the 30-yard line, but CD just could not haul it in, and the Eagles were back on offense, needing a first down to end the game. On 3rd and short, Jalen audibled and motioned Saquon Barkley out wide, allowing the Cowboys defense to get spread out, leaving Jalen with a running lane to ice the game. I gotta say that this was a lot closer than I expected. After Carter's ejection to start off the game, the Eagles defense was off kilter, but thanks to Fangio's second half adjustments, it seemed that the defense really dialed it up a few notches as they pitched a second half shutout. And this is all without their superstar defensive tackle in the middle. Rookie Jahad Campbell had a sensational debut, showcasing his incredible athleticism to break up a deep route up the seam, going stride for stride with a tight end, and then later forcing a fumble in the red zone just when Dallas got a fresh set of downs. It seems that Jahad Campbell and Zach Vaughn are in line to be the best linebacking duo in the NFL. I already talked about Jahad Campbell, but to really highlight with Zach Vaughn, he was once again stellar on Thursday night. As Miles Sanders was streaking towards the end zone, Zach Vaughn clocked in at 20.68 miles an hour to track down Miles Sanders on a touchdown-saving tackle. And we all know what happens later, as Jahad was able to force that fumble and wipe out any chance of Dallas getting points. I also gotta credit the defensive line after they had to adjust on the fly with the ejection of Jalen Carter. Jordan Davis played 1 snap short of a career high of 53 snaps, and I gotta say he was really good, playing extended playing time compared to what he's used to, especially in being the first game of the NFL season. And honestly, if he was able to finish a sack on Dak Prescott, I think he would have had a perfect night. Josh Uche, I think, was also a menace defensively, as he was graded the highest rated edge rusher in week 1. And right now, I really want to reserve any concerns I have with this defense once I do see him at full strength. It very well could happen next week against the Chiefs, but until I see Jalen Carter back in the lineup, I will reserve my judgment on this Eagles defense. But I do think after a shaky first half that they did do a good job in holding it down defensively. The Eagles offense, I thought, did a really good job of moving the ball effectively between the 20s, dominating time of possession, but I do wonder why it got so conservative, as we didn't see much of AJ Brown until the final minute of the game. Once again, Jalen Hurts, despite not filling up the stat sheet, was excellent. I thought he was really decisive on when to throw it and when to tuck it in and take off, protecting himself in the process by sliding early. Jalen made all the right reads and was arguably the best player on the field Thursday night. Seeing how Kansas City struggled to stick with the LA Chargers pass catches, I would really like to see a little bit more aggression from Kevin Patullo, with his only true deep shot being a perfectly executed bomb to Jahan Dotson. Dallas definitely seemed better than initially advertised, despite the recent trade of Micah Parsons to Green Bay. Brian Schottenheimer, I think, did a really good job, as I didn't think he seemed overwhelmed in the moment, and I thought the game plan was really well executed, especially when targeting the weaker cornerback on the Eagles and also steering clear of Quinion Mitchell and Cooper DeJean. Dak, I thought, was very sharp, especially in the first half when targeting CeeDee Lamb, but I didn't think George Pickens made too much of an impact on Thursday, as his loudest play was an unsportsmanlike conduct penalty. Next week, the Dallas Cowboys will be home to face the New York Giants in a divisional matchup for the second week in a row, and the Eagles will be heading to Arrowhead in a Super Bowl rematch against the Kansas City Chiefs.